What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 210. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Today's show is the interview with the great Scott Horton. He is, of course, the editorial director of antiwar.com. He is the founder and the man who puts together and runs the Libertarian Institute, both of those organizations I am also a part of. He's the author of The Butts Over My Two Shoulders, Enough Already, and Fool's Errand. He has another book, and the host of the Scott Horton Show, 5,000 plus interviews, all absolutely fantastic. And so much of, what the knowledge that I built on this show is from Scott, his show, antiwar.com, and everything that he's done. And so anytime I get a chance to talk to Scott, it's always a great time. And I think I have another great interview for you. We're looking back at Biden's first year as president, talking mostly about Russia and Afghanistan. Biden withdrew the troops from Afghanistan, but then kept on the economic war and is starving thousands of Afghans. Hundreds of thousands of children are at risk right now. Serious situation there. And of course, the situation that Biden has gotten himself in with Russia. And, Scott gives his take on both of these situations. Great episode. Everybody's going to love it. Check out the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, which is where you find my show, the Scott Horton Show, and tons of great libertarian content. The Connor Freeman, who's a co-host of the show, is typically writing in the featured article section there. So lots of great stuff there. And then, you can subscribe to the show for the video version on YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee, and then donate to the show directly at Patreon, Subscribestar, or crypto, and all that information is in the show notes page. If you rather support the Institute, antiwar.com, that's another great way to support what I'm doing, so feel free to do that. And then I want to just mention the sponsor of the show is the great Paloma Verde, palomaverdecbd.com, promo code PEACE. That saves you 25% off when you spend $75 or more, and it helps the show. It gets the show a kickback, so it's a great way to support the show. I know a lot of my libertarian audience are users of CBD. They find it helpful for anxiety, pain relief, getting to sleep. So many ways that CBD could help you. They have a great selection of products at Paloma Verde. They put the lab tester results right there on the website, so you're getting high quality products. If you're new to CBD, check out the education tab, but there's something that can help you at Paloma Verde. Just use the promo code PEACE to support the show. And now let's get into the interview with Scott. All right. What's up, Scott? Welcome back to the show. How you doing today?
I'm doing good, Kyle. How are you, man?
Doing well. Happy to have you back on, and want to talk about Biden's first year as president here and focus really in on Afghanistan and Russia. Scott, you've been on the show, I think, 3 times in 2021, and 2 of those times we really talked about Afghanistan, including after the withdrawal and just how, other than you really and a few other people, maybe like Danny Davis, were only willing to speculate that, the Afghan government would fall apart like it did. And so if anybody really wants to know about the withdrawal, I recommend going back and listening to that episode. But Scott, just maybe talk a little bit wider, and especially the last 4 months of the year after the U.S. troops left Afghanistan. Biden has essentially maintained the war in a different kind of way, but it may be even more cruel and rack up the biggest body count that we've seen so far.
Yeah, the thing is, I think I even had a section in Fool's Errand where I made like a little analogy comparison to the Austrian business cycle theory. And then I had enough of the people that I sent the original drafts to object to that because it didn't make any sense to them, and I don't know what the hell. And so I cut that out. I think maybe there's sort of slight references to it. But I had a whole kind of paragraph where I said, well, look, so the Austrian business cycle theory says that when the government artificially inflates the money supply, then what happens is that makes the value of certain things in certain sectors of the economy overvalued, seem to be, increase in value, when really it's an illusion that they're increasing in value. It's really just a matter of the debasing of the money. So sometimes we have widespread price inflation like we have right now, but then we also have bubbles in certain sectors, housing, tech stocks, that kind of thing, right? Well, now, it's the same kind of thing for the people that our government decided to put in power to rule over Afghanistan. That one, they're the recipients, just on the face of it, of all this paper money, all this new inflationary money that's being created by the U.S. government and sent over there. But then also, just sort of in a metaphorical sense, you got the U.S. Army and Marine Corps there to prop up the value of certain factions in the market of value of relative power of certain warlords and tribes and factions in the country. Some of them are being boosted by artificial U.S. government intervention, right? So then what does that mean at the end of the day? It means you got a Great Depression coming, right? It means essentially there's going to be a massive correction. And that's what we see now. And it's in terms, obviously, of the power of people like General Rashid Dostum, who's hiding in Turkey now, right? A bunch of Talibs living in his palace. And then also just in the market sense, they're facing a Great Depression. Essentially, all, every price in the country crashed. Everything went completely to hell. And the value of their currency went way down. And, this has always been in the American occupation and NATO occupation never changed this. And this is a desperately poor country. And it's a reason that all factions are dependent on the heroin trade is because the entire economy is dependent on the heroin trade. Like 2/3 of their gross domestic product is based on exporting poppies. And, the margins on growing, sustenance crops, they just aren't enough, especially in wartime when everything is so disorganized. And if you're going to, the profit margin on planting cumin is this, and on poppies, it's that. Well, forget about it. You're growing poppies, So all factions are essentially dependent on that. There's not much else of an economy there. A little bit of mining, a little bit of other crops, but really not very much. And so it's a desperately poor country. And then now that the Americans got beaten by the Taliban, then how do they act? They act like a bunch of poor losers, a bunch of sore losers. And so they leave and they keep sanctions on the Taliban when the Taliban is the sovereign government of Afghanistan now. So the bigger men would just say, you know what, fine, release their money from, America's been holding their money in the New York Fed or whatever banks they've been holding it in, whatever they're doing with it. Release the money and let them have it back. Lift the sanctions. Give the Taliban a chance. They won the war. Give them a chance to at least try to establish, whatever, humanitarian type organization that they can to feed starving people in the wintertime. You know what I mean? The fact of the matter is, cause I think, and I think probably any foreign policy analyst anywhere in the world would agree that these Taliban guys are a bunch of hillbillies from the far side of Kandahar, and they don't know what the hell they're doing, man. They don't know how to run a sovereign state. They're taking over this thing. It'd be like giving a state to you and me. We don't know how to run a state, but so they're the people there essentially are just between this rock and a hard place, right? This is the situation that we put them in. 20 years of war to throw the Taliban out of power and keep them out. And then now they're back again. And then so what are we supposed to do about it, right? Like we've got to, at the very least, the Americans should be, there's nothing we could do to help them be a government of the country. But we, at the very least, we could be sending them wheat. And we could be releasing money and lifting sanctions and letting them do their, try to get by. And or at the very least, even just stay out of the way and make it clear to the rest of the world that we expect them to step in and do their best. We promise they'll get no trouble from our Treasury Department if they try to send humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. And in fact, it's probably better if America doesn't do a damn thing now other than just release their funds and lift the sanctions and stay away. But, and I don't know what the numbers are. And a lot of times when there are humanitarian crises and tragedies going on, people exaggerate the extent of it. People are saying, I interviewed a guy the other day, said people are selling their children. I don't know if that's really true. I meant to push back on that a little bit, but I forgot to. I read there was one famous story of like this little girl was sold, and then it turned out that that was pretty much staged for the reporters, I think, or it was, an embellished story.
Right.
Um,
It was more of
and
a collateral situation, I think, where, like, if you're desperately poor in Afghanistan and you got nothing, you got no car title or anything to put up for some money, I think people like will take loans for from a relative, and like as collateral for that loan, essentially you ward off a kid, which, I mean,
it's crazy,
is
but
great,
yeah.
yeah, but
But these,
in
again,
yeah,
these are desperately poor people, man. I mean, these are the kinds of decisions that people make when they're starving. In China under Mao, they would eat each other.
right,
What are you gonna do?
right,
Um,
and yeah, I don't know, it doesn't sound like too I don't know, foreign to like when, desperately poor situations in the West and apprenticeships and stuff like that, where they're basically selling off and giving away kids that they couldn't really afford to have. So,
right.
I mean, it's nasty business. It's absolutely ugly that the Afghan people have to live like that. But, the portrayal that, they're selling their daughters to be raped by some dirty old man or something like that so they
Yeah,
could feed their bellies and smoke their opium pipes is just completely
yeah.
ridiculous.
Well, I
And that's
thought
kind
the
of what I'm
implication
getting.
more was that they're all going to starve. That this is how desperate it already is, and I don't really know that that's true. I'm sure a lot of people are going hungry. I don't know if it's outright starvation. Maybe it is. Um, I don't know, who's doing really good reporting on that from Afghanistan right now, and it could be that you and the guys running the show every day at antiwar.com have really done a better job of covering this over the last little while than me, and know things that I don't about the latest updates on that. But I guess all I meant to say was, I mean, I think you remember when they said that it was 500,000 children that had died under the Iraq sanctions in the 90s. Well, really, it was 300,000 excess deaths of children, and that was a lot. But in that original study, there was a guy who fudged the numbers, and they had to admit that. This one guy on his survey, everybody's house had a dead kid. But on everybody else's survey, it wasn't like that. It was this one guy's. No. So then, um, they had to climb down from that, and it makes stories like that then in the future, when it is important for people to know just how bad it is, people get extra skeptical. Saw the same thing in Yemen, where they said something like, I forgot what it didn't they say like 1 million people had died of cholera, or 1 million people had cholera. It was
They're
1 million
warning
people
about
had cholera.
yeah, had
Yeah.
cholera.
Yeah, and it was like, nah, like tens of thousands of them have, and thousands of them have died. 3, 5, 7,000, something like that at that point. But I had it from the people from Doctors Without Borders. I talked to them myself, and they said, well, we don't have tests for it. Essentially, people come in and sick with diarrhea. We call it cholera because there is a cholera outbreak right now, and everybody's drinking filthy water, and that's probably what it is. You know what I mean? But there's also diphtheria, and there's other things going around, other waterborne diseases and whatever going around. But so why estimate up, right? Why round up? If people are starving, they're starving. But if they're hungry, but not quite starving, then just say that. You know what I mean? We don't need to embellish, because the truth is bad enough. I mean, look at what has happened in this country. And look, the Americans ought to be able to say, you know what? Look, you guys put up a great fight. What the hell? You know what I mean? Don't you ever watch MMA? Like, I'm not a real big MMA guy, but at the end of the fight, you shake hands with the guy that beat you up, because what are you going to do? Sit there and cry about it, throw a temper tantrum, and put sanctions on him? You know what I mean? Or just admit that you got beat, dude. That's fine. It's their country. At least the southern and eastern part of it is. So the fact that they conquered the rest of it too, what are you going to do, North Americans? Sit here and cry about it still, And the fact that they're just this bad of just poor sports about it, to me, is humiliating, as much as it's, outrageous that they do this, that they treat human beings this way. But it's also just humiliating that this is Team USA. This is how our government behaves and treats other people, It's
Yeah.
nuts. All right, you should probably give me a second to try to get a handle on these dogs. You can hear them
Yeah,
barking
yeah.
out there, right?
Yep.
Let me see if I can grab one here.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I mean, just the reports coming out of Afghanistan seem unbelievable, and I've seen people talking about 1 million kids starving to death this winter, and I've just tried to hesitate away from using that number on the show because,
yeah,
you know,
that can't
from
be right.
from even from Yemen, you kind of learn that people will start boiling leaves, and adults go hungry so kids could eat, and adults don't really die from malnutrition. Now that doesn't uh, I have a little niece now, Scott, and I know how hard my brother works to make sure she's getting the meals whenever she has, and short of doing that, we consider that in America child abuse. And there's going
Right.
to be babies in Afghanistan this winter who, like, if they get calories at all, that's what they'll have. They're not going to get like vitamins and everything like
Right.
that. Their mothers will be too malnourished to produce breast milk and it's going to be horrific. When you look even generations down the line at how many people are like overdosing in Afghanistan. I worked at a place where we had a lot of kids who were like in PTSD, like abusive situations or neglected or things like that. And what happens when you have like a group of kids like that? They overdose at 15, right?
Yep.
And they commit suicide at 24, things like that. And so it seems like we're just setting Afghanistan up, with this really, really horrific thing that's going to happen this winter for a generation, multi-generation long, struggle and recovery.
Hey, listen, did you see the thing in the New York Times by Thomas Gibbons Neff about going back to Helmand province there? Or was it?
N-
No, no, no. Yeah, Helmand, where he goes to Marja. Did you see?
No, I must have missed that one.
Okay, so for people who don't know, Thomas Gibbons Neff, he's a friend of mine. And I really respect him. He's the guy at the New York Times that I respect the most out of all of their guys. He was a Marine in Afghanistan. I forget. I think he was in Iraq and Afghanistan. Certainly, he was a Marine in Afghanistan. And I quote him in Fool's Errand. This is when he wrote a thing to the Washington Post, I think was his start in journalism. Or no, it was after the fact. And he was writing about it. I forget now. Anyway, he was talking about how he realized, I forget if it was in real time or later, but anyway, how he realized after the Boston bombing that he thought he was over there in Afghanistan essentially as a bullet sponge, being brave, right? Drawing fire to himself to protect his mom and sister back home. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially to protect us regular, week-old civilian folk back home with his bravery out there. And he'd put himself at risk and draw the bad guys to him to keep us safe at home. And then he says, but wait a minute, if my war in Afghanistan is what's motivated terrorist attacks against civilians back home in the country, well, then that makes this whole thing not worth it at all then, right? What am I doing? And that was when he quit the military, and then he went to write for the Post and then the Times as a war reporter. And I think I've read one thing by him about the Afghan war that pissed me off, but otherwise, no. I mean, otherwise, solid reporting. So that's who he is. Anyway, so he just wrote a thing about how he went to Marja in the Helmand province, and he met this old guy who was like the head tribal chief that he had fought with his Marines there, and how the guy's totally cool now. The war's over. White guys can walk down the street. It's cool. They're not carrying M16, M4s. They're not fighting. He's just a reporter. So he goes and talks to the guy. It's fine. And the guy, there's even a quote from him where he says, yeah, this is so much better now that the war's over and we don't have to kill the foreigners and they're not killing our friends anymore. It's much better now. It's like, in other words, I'm getting to something with this. Point being, one is Neff is like, damn, dude, we never had to fight these people. What were we doing surging into the Helmand province to fight this old man? What were we doing here, right? That was what the essay is really about, But the other point is, listen, where Thomas Gibbons Neff can go now without his battle gear, that's where any NGO can now go in Afghanistan. And you know what? If they need to make a new deal with the Taliban to let, real humanitarian aid in, or if they need to, hide behind some Canadian front company because the Taliban won't do business with the Americans anymore or whatever. I don't care. Call it Mexico. Call it whatever you want. Send these people wheat to eat. What the hell are you doing? We completely, they were dependent on, I'm sorry, because I got lost on my tangent there about the opium earlier. Their economy was completely dependent on opium and Western aid. Now it's dependent just on opium, right? But they've lost tens of billions of dollars of cash money flowing into that country, most of which was going to the top, but it was keeping the economy going. To have all that disappear is a tremendous shock. Like, I don't know exactly, but, I don't think there's a Forbes magazine inside Afghanistan doing an extensive report. But, essentially, they've had a Great Depression, a crash in prices in the value of all kinds of businesses and whatever those businesses are producing across that country. A total catastrophe with the collapse of all that Western cash flowing in there. And so, yeah, it's really, and look, I think this is really true too. Like, I haven't done a very careful survey, but I've noticed, important academic types like Max Abrams and folks who don't usually just shoot from the hip, pointing out that, and you can certainly just tell anecdotally or whatever by the deafening silence, that all the foreign policy people at all the think tanks, all those hawks at all those cable news channels, and all those people that said we had to have this war for 20 years, those same people said, we can't leave or else what's going to happen to the poor women and little girls? Oh, we love the little girls of Afghanistan so much that we have to keep drone bombing them. We have to keep sending the Marines back to Helmand again and again. Keep sending the Green Berets back to Nangarhar again and again. And for what? To protect the little girls, to protect the civilian population from those Taliban monsters. And as soon as the Taliban win the war, the answer is, yeah, screw them. And you can't find anybody at Foreign Policy or the Council on Foreign Relations or all your favorite foreign policy hawks on Twitter. They don't have a word to say about what we're talking about right now, about America holding Taliban money, withholding, sovereign Afghan government money that belonged to the former government that they now by rights should have to just turn over to the Taliban, and keeping sanctions on them and keeping, preventing the Treasury from giving the world a blank check to go ahead and send aid, and we promise not to mess with you, which is what, people got to understand what a 8 trillion ton gorilla the U.S. Treasury Department is on a global basis. You cannot cross them or they will absolutely put you out of business. So, and all those hawks who said we got to do it for their own good all this time don't have a word to say about it. Don't have a word to say about it. Like, what are we doing, man? We can't send B-52s and drop wheat on these people? Not to coin a phrase there. It's an old Bill Hicks joke, It was cool watching them shoot missiles down chimneys, but couldn't we feasibly use that same technology to shoot food at hungry people? Yeah, I think we could. And if there's anybody in the world American society owes, it's the poor, pathetic Afghans, after all that we put them through. And, I use we advisedly. I know there are a lot of libertarian language, national socialists out there that don't like that kind of commie language. But you know what? In my defense, English is a very communist language. It's really not my fault that it was written that way a long time ago by whoever. But secondly, there are 300 million of us, and most of us in this country have not prioritized leaving these people the hell alone. And if we had, then we would have left them the hell alone a long time ago. And this wouldn't be an issue right now at all. Somebody else would have already solved this. I made a bumper sticker in 2010 for Liberty stickers that said Iraq and Afghanistan, 2 giant decade-long wars for nothing. That was 10 years ago. And we only finally just got out of there. And so there is some kind of, not to paraphrase Madeleine Albright or Osama bin Laden or anything, but there is some level of collective responsibility. Not that I'm saying like Americans deserve punishment or whatever for what their government has done, but I'm saying it's my opinion, not that I would enforce it on anyone like it's their duty or whatever. It's my opinion that Americans have a responsibility to try to oppose what our government is doing to other people around the world the best that we can. And we have not done that, to this society's shame and disgrace. We have not done that. And I know that you know that just as well as I do. This war in Yemen goes on. Biden promised to end the war, and he didn't. He promised to end the war almost a year before he was inaugurated. And then even when he was inaugurated, he promised, okay, I'm knocking off all the aid. to the offensive war. Oh, wow. And sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
And then he didn't, right? And then they admitted that, nope, we're still helping them with their maintenance. We're still selling them weapons. And look, I mean, that's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. Forget Afghanistan and what's happening to Yemen. I know you and Dave and Jason cover this every day at antiwar.com. Just the absolute, I mean, was it 30 people killed in some airstrikes just yesterday? Brand new Saudi offensive going on. And of course, you know, the Saudis can't quit because they lost, right? Or they're losing badly. And the Houthis don't want to quit because they're winning. And the Americans, you know, unless Joe Biden absolutely puts his foot down and hollers that I want this war over and I want it over right at him now, it's just not going to end. It's just the whole thing. It's just on autopilot. And and you know, there are some people who work really hard to try to put pressure and bring attention to that conflict. But it's just not enough.
Yeah.
What do we need? We need, you know, the right kind of star power in the right kind of way. But it's just nobody's partisan issue. Obama started it. Trump continued it. Biden's continuing it. So if you had a partisan reason to oppose it, you also have a partisan reason to kind of shut up about it too, you know?
Yep.
And I guess, you know, most people don't know anything about it. Most people just figure, well, geez, if we're bombing somebody there must be some kind of good reason for it, or I would have heard about that or something, right? It's kind of gets rationalized away. And, you know, a lot of people probably don't even know where Yemen is. And it's just, it's funny, right? There's some kind of ratio. I don't know if you could, maybe Lisa Simpson could graph it for us, you know, the ratio between the degree of sin and the degree of just total indifference and obliviousness to the cause of what is happening. And it's such a perfect alibi, Kyle. Oh, no, see, it's the Saudi-led coalition. No, America's just providing assistance. It's that America's the superpower, and Saudi Arabia is our client state. And this is the American-Saudi war. That's what the Yemenis call it in Sana'a. That's what Nasser Arabi, the Yemeni journalist, told me. They call it the American-Saudi war. They're not fooled by that. And yet, what did these people ever do to us? The only people in Yemen who ever attacked the United States is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. But this war is being fought on their side, on their behalf, against their enemies, the Houthis, who never did anything to us. All they ever did to us was chant death to America. But they didn't even mean that. All they were doing was they were trolling Abdullah Saleh for making a deal with George W. Bush and palling around with America while America was invading Iraq. And so they were essentially mocking Abdullah Saleh, the previous dictator, for being an American sock puppet. So they were never threatening us ever, you know, sticks and stones. And yet what do? We destroy their entire society. We help the Saudis. It is help the Saudis. It's a perfect alibi because, you know, I don't think the Americans would have waged the war in this way other than helping the Saudis wage the war in this way. And then, but what do they do? And they did this during Iraq War I. So I wouldn't put it past them entirely just for the Americans to have done this. But, you know, in the book, Kyle, I quote a guy named Michael Knights from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, WINEP, who are absolutely the hawks. It's a spin-off of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, created by Martin Indyk for the purposes of being hawks in the world, you know? And this guy, Michael Knights, was like, this is genocide. This is sickening. What are we doing here? This is like we did in Iraq War I, where we hit their water and their electricity and their sewage. This is barbarianism. This is barbarian. What do we? And this is a guy from the premier hawkish think tank in Washington, D.C. is saying this is just absolutely crazy, you know? But, you know, yeah. And then, but what are you going to do, right? It's just one thing in a news cycle, an endless news cycle, a 15-minute news cycle, right? A 30-minute news cycle. It's not even a 24-hour one. It's just this constant wash of mostly BS, right? Like, you know, if you just were just changing the channels or flipping through the news feeds or whatever. How can you tell what's important and what's not? How do you weigh the relative importance of these things? Like, I got to admit, one of the top stories of the day today is the controversy over a transgendered swimmer in Pennsylvania. A guy who was on the swim team at the university with the men's section for 2 years and then switched. And it's like a huge dude, too. Like it's kind of a funny thing. It caught my attention. That's all I'm saying. It caught a lot of people's attention today that this is like a funny thing or an interesting thing for people to take sides on. Patton Oswalt, the comedian, went and genuflected because he took a selfie with Dave Chappelle. And Dave Chappelle said a thing that hurts transgendered people's feelings and stuff. This is what's dominating the news cycle as we're recording this today, right?
Yep.
And I got to admit, these things caught my attention too. I read both of the things. I read Patton Oswalt's little essay about how sorry he was. I can't help it. What am I going to say? But the same thing for everybody, right? But then it's too few of us who go, well, wait a minute, now back to business, and go back to the front page at antiwar.com and make sure and check what all else is going on around here. There's a real question about whether we're going to be able to get back in the Iran deal now due to the Biden government's just absolutely horrible politics this whole time. They should have just signed on the dotted line last March. Idiots. And now look at what they've done. They can't get back in the deal without totally climbing down because the Iranians aren't gonna. And so they might not be able to get back in the deal. Now, I don't know what difference that'll really make because I don't think the Ayatollah is going to make nukes anyway. All that's a bunch of BS in the first place. But, it'll certainly prevent, the end of the Cold War between America and Iran, which is the purpose of all of this. That's why Netanyahu insisted Trump get out of that deal. Nobody's afraid of an Iranian nuke. They're afraid that Iran will make peace with America. Everybody should read Trita Parsi's book, Treacherous Alliance. It's all the quotes in the world you need in there about how, well, geez, we don't want the Americans talking with the Iranians. We're afraid that they'll start getting along. They got way too many issues in common. Hate the Taliban, hate Saddam Hussein, like oil and money. I don't know. You get some Americans to play ball on the Ayatollah's field, no problem maybe, if you let them talk. But you don't let them talk. You make sure that the controversy stays Iran's insane Islamist fundamentalism and nuclear weapons ambitions and, aggressive whatever it is. In fact, oh, man, I shouldn't bring this up without the footnote on the tip of my tongue. What was it? Oh, I know what it was. Wait, do I? It was somebody had sent me this thing from a long time ago about how if the Iraq war backfires and giving Iraq to the Shiites only empowers Iran, how then that will help, though, to unite the Sunni kings and the Sunni Arabs with Israel against them. It was really old. Oh, man, I'm so old and stupid now, Kyle. There was a time I would have never been able to lose a footnote like that. I just had this. I'll have to find it for you. What was it? People send me so much stuff, man, and I'm sorry. I can't think of what it was. It was like a CIA thing. It was like someone had like a declassified CIA document from, I'm trying to think. It would have been in the early 90s or something. I don't know. I shouldn't have brought it up. I'm sorry. But it was a funny thing. I just liked it because it was like, then again, if the Iranians do take, oh, you know what? It might have even been from like during the Iran-Iraq war.
Okay.
Like, if the Iranians do end up seizing Baghdad, well, that could be okay too, because then that would maybe just help to drive the Sunni kings into our alliance like that, make that easier. Something like that. Ah, hell, I'd have to go back. I used to remember everything. Now, not so much. Well, now I'm old and bald.
Yeah. So, anyways, back to Afghanistan. If so if we were talking in like February 1st of 2021, I guess Sky will put in order that Biden was most likely to return to the Iran nuclear deal, then to end the support for Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and then to withdraw from Afghanistan. And boy, was I wrong about the order of those three. So I don't know. I mean, is there credit we could give Biden for withdrawing from Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Because at the same time, it's not like to continue the economic war is not really an improvement by that much.
That's true. However, I mean, if he had left combat forces there, we would have a real war on our hands right now. We would have had to escalate because the Taliban would have gone back to war. And, we had Green Berets in Nangarhar. We had, still Rangers and whoever all hiding out at Bagram Air Base. I guess they had already withdrawn from Helmand province. They had some Marines back down in Helmand under Trump. A slight escalation down there. Reinforcing at Lashkar Gah, essentially. But so if they had broken Trump's deal, there would have been hell to pay, Kyle. It would have been absolute catastrophe. They'd have fought their way into Kabul, fought their way into the Bagram Air Base. It would have been bad. And that was why Biden got out. The military was trying to get him to stay, but they had to admit that, we're going to need a lot more troops if we're going to stay. And so he told them no. But look, I mean, he really screwed up, man. To be perfectly honest, on one hand, is absolutely heroic that he faced down the D.C. establishment and said, I don't give a crap what y'all say. I'm calling this shot, and I say we're leaving. That was heroic. But, man, he should have just stuck with the deadline. We had a deal. May the 1st. That's the deal. And if they'd done that, then they would have had their decent interval. It would have only been a few months, but they would have had their decent interval to get their guys out of there. And instead, they delayed the withdrawal, but the Taliban didn't delay their timetable for taking over the country. So they're taking over the country as we're trying to, our guys are trying to get out at the airport. They turn over the Bagram Air Base to the Afghan National Army, but then they turned it right over to the Taliban. So they were left essentially in this tight corner trying to get out and depending entirely on the Taliban, essentially on the Taliban's good graces to protect them on the way out of the country and all of this kind of thing. So in doing so, he let all of his political enemies essentially spin the withdrawal as this betrayal and this horrible thing. And in fact, I don't know if this is really due to any of that, but it's just, incidental to that was presumably the Islamic State faction there set off this suicide bombing and killed 13. I think they were almost all Marines, but then there was like an airman and a corpsman or something in there too. But they killed 13, and they're young kids, man, 18-year-old boys, right? And I think one woman, but who were born after, I forget if there was a girl or not. Do you remember? They were all born after September 11th.
Yeah.
Like these are kids who were killed in this suicide attack. And then it was not a revenge attack, but what it was a, it was an attempt to protect from another attack. They completely called the shot wrong and killed an aid worker and his neighbor and their families, 7 children and 3 adults, and little bitty children too, in this just absolute bloody massacre, which is, the perfect, if you don't take me wrong, kind of, punctuation mark on the end of that war. Now, of course, that's how the Afghan war ended, with a suicide attack against a bunch of kids and then a drone attack against a bunch of kids, which, those kids were Marines. They were a military target, but still, they're just kids, man. And just, damn Charlie Savage, by the way, too, and the New York Times for perpetrating the CIA lie that the Russians had put bounties on the scalps of American soldiers in Afghanistan in the summer of 2020, right when Trump was badgering his cabinet about, I want to get out before the election. And they just absolutely shut that down with the complete lie about Vladimir Putin and all that. So I'm not saying that Trump would have definitely followed through, but it was so obvious what the CIA was doing there and using Charlie Savage, the pathetic tool, subhuman, to carry their water for them in that way. Just, oh man, I'm glad I didn't finish what I was about to say there. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll add to the, perfect, just analogy or whatever, the end of the war. I don't know if you caught, the New York Times recently said that the suicide bomber at the Abbey Gate at the Kabul airport had tried to pull off an attack in India, and for whatever reason was handed over to the CIA, who put him in a couple high security prisons in Afghanistan. And so then after the US gives the control of those prisons over to the Afghan army, and that, then ends up in the hands of the Taliban, that guy ends up getting out. And, they say, shrug, we can't figure out how he got connected with ISIS-K, but he did, and then he blew himself up. And, it's just what happened in Iraq all over again.
Yep. And remember, too, that ISIS-K in Afghanistan was a CIA project. There's this great article on the origins of ISIS at afghananalysts.org by I want to say it's Osman Bornen, I think. Osman Bornen. And he talks about how these guys are the core group of Afghan ISIS, were refugees from Obama and the Pakistani government's war in the Swat Valley and federally administered tribal territories there in Pakistan in 2010. And it was part of the Obama deal was we get to hunt down the last 29 al-Qaeda guys in Pakistan. And our side of the deal is we'll help the Pakistani military fight their war against the Tariqi Taliban there. And these guys had fled from that war to the Afghan side of the line for safe haven there. And so then the Americans, well, in his article, he doesn't say the Americans. He says the Afghan National Intelligence Directorate, NDS, National Directorate Service, whatever it is. But, I mean, those guys are the CIA. They're run by the CIA the whole time. So I think that
trained,
was at least
funded by the
yeah.
U.S., yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, during this, and this is, during the Obama surge time, too. It's not like the CIA wasn't running the NDS at that time. Come on. And so they said, yeah, they wanted to use these guys. They did use them for tit-for-tat type attacks as revenge against the Pakistani government. You sponsor the Afghan government, the Afghan Taliban against the Afghan government. Well, we'll sponsor the Pakistani Taliban against the Pakistani government. How about that? How do you like that? A little bit of payback. And then the other thing was we can use these guys against the Afghan Taliban, right? And then it was a couple of years after that they hoisted the black flag and declared their loyalty to Baghdadi and ISIS. So that was where that group came from in the first place. And, just another oops bit of blowback and backdraft from America's terror wars. And
all right, Scott. Well, let's turn and talk about the Biden policy towards Russia, where I guess there's been two flare-ups in between a period of some calm, like in the early year, April, really. They were all worried that Putin was about to invade Ukraine, and he had built up over 100,000 troops there and everything like that. And then, kind of forget about it, and that de-escalates. And then starting, late October, November this year, we essentially had the same thing, except nobody's really reporting on the fact that Russia actually has less troops, even claimed by the U.S. intelligence forces on the quote unquote border with Ukraine, than they did in April. But nonetheless, This has led to a pretty major, cycle of escalation between the two sides. And Putin has now, I think, made some pretty serious demands of Biden. And I don't know what you think's going to happen and how you think Biden's done on the Russia policy front.
Well, so far, I mean, he talks tough in public and then he backs down in private has been the method, which is fine with me. You know what I mean? By all means, beat your chest on CNN as long as the phone call with Putin is, look, buddy, we understand each other, right? And if that's the case, then I'll settle for that. I prefer that they just get along. But, I won't say Biden's smart enough, but he's experienced enough to know the role of Ukraine in East-West relations here and how tricky this could be and how dangerous this could be. And I think that, he's certainly pushed his luck, But then again, I think that he blinked once Putin called his bluff, right? He, as of the time we're recording this, it would have been, what, 3 or 4 weeks ago now, that he announced that, actually, no, we won't be inviting Ukraine into NATO for the next 10 years, over the next decade, which is indefinitely,
Yep.
essentially. And then he was asked at a press conference, well, if Russia does invade, will you supply troops? And he said, no, we will not do that. Our commitment to NATO is one thing. Ukraine's not a member of NATO, so no, we won't. And that's severe climbing down. So then Blinken says today, for example, oh, yeah, well, there'll be serious consequences. Okay, well, whatever. Your president already said that, no, there won't be. And, and I guess they did say, if Russia did invade Ukraine, they would level this massive sanctions regime on Russia. But then Russia responded to that. We don't care about that. We're ready to go ahead and, completely abandon SWIFT and completely turn to the east. You want to treat us that badly? We'll just, deal with Iran and China and India and whoever over here on this side of Asia and leave you guys to your own devices. In other words, neutralizing that threat, right? Like, we've already prepared for this eventuality. So what good does it do America to push Russia east away from Europe and towards China? I mean, I can't say I'm too worried about it, but it's certainly, I would prefer to see. In fact, I think Russia's probably a great bridge between civilizations in a way, right? Like, they're Christian, but they're Eastern Orthodox, right? And they're, so they're a great, and they're, a huge part of their landmass are Asiatic peoples and whatever. We're not Slavs and not white-skinned Europeans, but are Russians. And so, I don't know. It seems like if you had a society where the people in charge were just kind of trying to look out for what's good for the good old USA and the people of it over the medium to long term here, then they would be looking at Russia as a friend and as a country where our only priority is to figure out all the best ways that we can be friendly with them and work together with them. I was joking with Ray McGovern on the show about, you might remember this, when Russia seized the Crimean Peninsula after the coup of 2014, which Biden was involved in as vice president, that Andrew Coburn had a friend who was at a cocktail party with a bunch of military industrial complex guys in Crystal City outside of Washington, D.C., which is like the big military industrial complex neighborhood or whatever, one of them. And he said they were all laughing and joking and another round of drinks all around for everyone. And isn't this great news that Russia seized the Crimean Peninsula? Now, again, to me, I don't care if they do or not, but what's the point here? The point here is, great, more tension. Great, the coup backfired. Instead of getting away with it, we've got consequences. Okay, that's fine too. We'll just build up a new, better Black Sea fleet. And we'll just have more exercises in the north. I bet we'll get a whole new aircraft carrier through Congress based on this alone.
Mm-hmm.
And to them, this is great. But just think about, as my friend Adam says, it's the flea wagging the dog here. Where you have this tiny group of people with the most narrow interests that you could imagine. Cashing dividend checks from getting naval ships built, right? That's 1/100th of a percent of the population of this country or less are directly benefiting from that, but they benefit directly from increased tensions between the USA and Russia, the two greatest thermonuclear armed powers in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're like, the average guy might think that the people in charge of the policy aren't really thinking about that. Who's going to make a lot of money off of selling weapons?
Yep.
That they would have higher interests in mind. They don't.
Yeah.
That's all they are, man. And so they're willing to, anyway, I'm sorry to answer your question. I think I'm grateful that Biden is backing down. And I think, they have talks coming up here. And I expect Putin to play his cards very well. And I honestly, man, I think my biggest fear is that Biden will not be up to the challenge of the talks. And you hear this from right wingers, and whatever hawks saying that, I should specify Republican hawks and people like that attacking him and saying, yeah, he's going to give away the whole store, right? The way that the liberals attacked Trump for meeting with Kim. Oh, he's going to lay down and capitulate and give everything over to the enemy and all this kind of stuff. Well, I'm not really worried about that. I'm worried that because he'll be unable to deal with Putin on Putin's level, because he'll space out so much and get, tired easy and all those kinds of things, that he'll just be extra stubborn. That he'll be, just like Trump in Hanoi, right? He'll be so overly cautious of being generous and doing the right thing that he won't. He'll refuse to back down and be smart. When the obvious play here is obvious to anybody who doesn't have a dog in the fight, which is for the Americans to just back the hell off, for them to encourage their Ukrainian friends to declare neutrality and friendship with both sides, right? Not isolation from both sides, but friendship with both sides. And, on one hand, recognize stronger autonomy for the Donbass region, like in the deal at Minsk II, while at the same time, trying to apologize and offer forgiveness and try to figure out a way to, end the hard feelings from that kind of thing and reintegrate the Donbass into the rest of the country. If they'll, what's going to take for them to get back together again. In other words, obviously every faction here should be determined to find where the areas of tension are and cut them off and cool them off. It's clear that Russia doesn't want to expand their territory. Putin could have taken the Donbass region in 2015 without even moving any troops. All he had to do was draw a line with a black magic marker. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to think that now he wants to march to the river and seize, Azov or certainly not Odessa. I mean, I don't know. If they really pushed him, I guess he could. But I don't think there's any reason to believe that that's what Putin really has in mind here, is he wants to seize the eastern half of that country. There's no real reason to believe that. Again, in 2015, the people of the East voted on a plebiscite, not the entire East, but the Donbass region, the far East, voted to join the Russian Federation. He told them no. And that was in the worst of the fighting. He absolutely could have sent a couple of army divisions in there and just said, okay, this is our territory, the same way he did in Crimea. And that would have been the end of that, essentially. He didn't do that then. So I think it's pretty clear that what's going on now is that the Americans have been hawking it up. They've been increasing all of their, provocative moves in the Baltic and Black Seas and the Okhotsk Seas with their bomber flights up to the 12-mile demarcation point and sailing all their battleships into the Black Sea all the time and all that kind of thing. And then I'm sorry. I think Ray was. I was talking with Ray McGovern. I'm pretty sure he was quoting from Putin's speech, where he was claiming his own reasons to believe. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, Kaba. I don't think there's any reason to believe, like public reason to believe, that they were planning on putting in the anti-missile missiles into Ukraine the way they have Poland. And these are the missile launchers, the Mk-41 missile launcher, which can also be a dual-use item that you can fire a nuclear-tipped Tomahawk cruise missile from. And so, that's the real concern that the Russians have about the Americans putting these launch tubes in Poland. Now, as far as I know, there's no open source public reason to believe that they had a plan to do this in Ukraine as well. But I could be wrong about that, but that's as far as I know. But
that's kind of what I've gotten to, that I haven't seen any real reason. But Putin, in a speech or in a comment related to when he announced like his list of demands, or what the security guarantees that Russia was asking for, he made a statement about being concerned about advanced NATO weaponry being moved into Ukraine. And I kind of read that as, they're worried about the Patriot missiles, but I didn't see specifically Putin claim that or any specific claims about what weapons they're talking about.
I see. Well, that wasn't in like the list of demands that we want assurances that you're not going to put the anti-ballistic missile systems into Ukraine.
I don't remember that being specific in there, or at least specific to Ukraine. I guess I
Okay.
think maybe Eastern Europe was
Right.
the demand.
Yeah. So I guess that was what Ray was saying with it. Yeah, he implied that he knew that this was going on, even though it hadn't been published anywhere yet. But
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not sure I buy that. Um, it would certainly be a huge escalation on Biden's part if he was just going to install those and then announce that they were there. It'd be a huge provocation to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I think earlier the way you said it, you kind of had air quotes, kind of like scare quotes around building up near the border, which I think is, probably appropriate because from what I'd read, a lot of this buildup, such as it was, which apparently was never as big as the Washington Post had claimed, but this was taking place 200 miles from the border. But 200 miles is pretty far. I mean, that's from
Right.
Austin to Dallas. That's 3.5 hour drive, on Texas freeways, speeding. So, that's not exactly a buildup right on the border. Now, it could be that if you're a real analyst and you're looking at exactly what they had arrayed there, that really was looking like an invasion force or not. I wouldn't take their word for it, but I guess that's possible. But I don't think that, well, I guess I should say, the way that I look at that is essentially a threat that, you've made us mad. Now we want assurances that you're not going to go further.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're threatening that. And the same kind of thing that you see with Taiwan. Whenever the Chinese build up, they say, oh, see, they're threatening to invade Taiwan. It's like, well, kind of, but what's the threat? The threat is if Taiwan declares independence, we're going to invade them. So don't declare independence, right? So I'm not saying that's okay or wonderful or anything, but I'm just saying the context there is not China's just preparing to invade Taiwan. It's that China, fears or seems to fear, whether for good reason or not, that the Taiwanese are about to do something provocative, and they're telling them, don't do the provocative thing and provoke me. So, I think that's what you have here too, in the case of Russia. So, the Americans, I think they really do a lot of the time, Kyle. I mean, I know you've read enough foreignpolicy.com in your life and enough Foreign Affairs magazine. These people really do believe their own BS a lot of the time, that they just cannot, get their head around the idea that maybe they're the one who did the thing that caused the problem, that they're the provocative ones, that the other side might see a reason to believe that they're the ones being defensive in the face of our aggression. And they just can't. They just don't have the imagination to see. They look at Vladimir Putin and they go, look at how evil that guy is. Remember that time he burned our flag and called us the great Satan or whatever, right? It's an emotional reaction.
Right.
And I mean, you got to admit, the guy's pretty gangster. The way he carries himself is like, if you were a State Department guy, if you were a State Department weenie, you would be afraid of him. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, but then, I think that means that they never say, well, as long as we're just drinking tonight and talking amongst ourselves, we really maybe shouldn't have done that coup back in 2014 that helped to precipitate this whole crisis. In that case, Crimea would still belong to Ukraine. The Donbass region would still belong, would also be under the jurisdiction of Kiev. It wouldn't be this mess. Maybe we could have tried better, differently later, something. But boy, that really didn't work out. Nah, they won't ever talk like that. They'll never admit that.
Yeah.
That this is their doing. And so then what's the other answer? The other answer was that evil Vladimir Putin. He's the return of Stalin. He's the return of the Tsar. He wants to conquer Eastern Europe. His mindless, mad aggression must be checked. I just saw Ann Applebaum from the Washington Post tweeted that he knows that everything we're doing is defensive. He knows that NATO is a defensive alliance. He knows that he's the guilty aggressor and we are only the defensive ones reining him in. So don't give me this crap about how Putin might look at it, that we are expanding NATO into his sphere. We're just defending the world from him, and he knows that. Whatever. And it's just like, dude, you know what? I don't think so.
Yep.
I don't think that that's right at all. Have you look at, Oliver Stone's interviews with him? He's like, Oliver Stone, what am I supposed to do? Oliver Stone says, come on, Mr. Putin, you got to recognize this is just a racket. These guys are selling weapons to the Pentagon and making a lot of money by pretending that you're a threat. And he says, yeah, but you're surrounding my country with anti-ballistic missiles. So what am I supposed to do, Oliver Stone? Like, not respond to this? Right? And then, by the way, so what happened? About a year after that interview was when Putin announced he's got a brand new, heavy, multi-intercontinental ballistic missile reentry vehicle rocket that can launch, 24 warheads plus its dummies that can kill all of Texas with one rocket, every major city in Texas with one rocket. He's got another one that's going to go around the South Pole where we got no defenses whatsoever. He's got another one that's a nuclear-powered cruise missile that essentially has unlimited range and can evade, go all the way around any American defenses to, go around the back way to hit any target that they want in the continental United States. He's got a nuclear torpedo that now he can use to set off a nuke in the middle of San Francisco Bay, Chesapeake Bay, and, put those cities completely out of business for generations. What am I missing? Oh, and then the hypersonics.
Yep.
And he says, and in his giant speech in 2018, where he debuted all of his new nuclear technology, or at least made all of his claims, he said, you know why I'm doing this, right? George Bush got out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty and started putting anti-missile missiles all around my country. So what am I supposed to do, man? Not make hypersonic missiles? Not make nuclear-powered cruise missiles that have the range to evade your defenses? No. That's my job. I'm the head of state around here. And it's like, you know what? For a raving psychopath, he seems pretty reasonable in his creation of hydrogen bomb torpedoes. You know what I mean? Who put him in that position to act in such an insane manner? It's George Bush and Dick Cheney did it. And John Bolton. And they did it, why? Because it was a racket, so they could sell a bunch of tech that doesn't even work. Right? This anti-ballistic missile tech. And, I have it on good authority. The only real way to take out incoming ICBMs over the North Pole is with H-bombs. All this shoot a bullet with a bullet stuff doesn't work. You need essentially neutron bombs in space, enhanced radiation devices in space that knock out all the electronics on the incoming ICBMs. That's the only way to do it. Everything else is a bunch of crap. Everything else, and that's a boondoggle too. But everything else is just in fact, I did meet a guy who said he was an engineer on those projects. Said, no, you can shoot down a missile with a missile, but the question is, how much are you willing to pay per missile, man? Because for an extremely high price, I can shoot down some missiles for you, But we're talking about one or two from North Korea. We're not talking about thousands coming over the poles from Russia,
right.
Or even hundreds. I'm telling you, man, you hear me talk about the Middle East this way all the time, Kyle, but, America's relationship with Russia, too, it just didn't have to be this way at all. This is all because of Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and for that matter, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They've just done nothing but make this thing worse and worse, and for no good reason whatsoever, man. No good reason at all. On September 11th, Putin was the first one to call the White House and say, I'm at your service. You need help invading Afghanistan? You can use my bases in Kazakhstan. Go get them SOBs, man. And you could crack a joke there about how, he was just giving us our own Vietnam and all that, but nah, not really. I think he expected for the Americans to go in there and hunt some Arabs and get the job done, not let them all go and then turn to Iraq. And so, I'm not saying he's a great guy. He's the head of state, and probably more ruthless than many, but they talk about him like he's Hitler, and he ain't Hitler. He's Hindenburg, right? He should be easy to deal with.
So, yeah, I guess last question here. I'm just gonna kind of present, I guess, a more pessimistic case on Russia, where you compare it to the Middle East, like Iran. The Biden administration doesn't seem to understand the Russian position on Ukraine. Still, they're worried, and they, like you said, they actually believe their own BS. They really think that Putin wants to take Ukraine, and honestly, the reaction should be, if you want annex like the Donbass, let them. It's an economic problem. It's not like beneficiary to Putin, and if he
Right.
annexes the Donbass region, then that like demographically will put the Ukrainian population as the majority of Ukraine for decades to come, if not forever. And so it's not like a move that would be particularly beneficial to Putin in Russia. I think he would prefer to have a state in Ukraine next door that's about a 50-50 split between Russia and Ukrainians, and that way it doesn't take a hard position
Right.
towards Russia or the EU, and presents a buffer between
Yep.
Moscow and the NATO border. But
Yep.
they seem to have no ability to understand that, are completely paranoid that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. That's why I'm concerned. This week Biden is apparently telling the Ukrainian President Zelensky that we'll act decisively if Russia invades Ukraine. And while I mean, to me and you, that may mean sanctions. I don't know if Zelensky understands that message. He seems to be somewhat of a novice himself. And then,
Yeah.
um, I
Boy, he
guess,
better know better. That sounds. I mean, if I'm being reassured that by the American president, I'm not very reassured. That sounds to me like some weasel words. Oh, you'll act decisively, huh? You mind describing what you mean by that?
right. And I was just gonna, so as I learned from you, personnel is policy here, and we
Right.
do have Joe Biden, the old man, and these would be
Yep.
tedious negotiations, a lot of like detail and stuff. Like the call with Putin was what, 4 hours or 3 hours? They said. Can you imagine this guy sitting there? Can you imagine your grandpa sitting there for 4 hours and listening to one thing without falling asleep? It doesn't happen. And so, Wendy Sherman, I believe, is leading the talks in Moscow. At least it's not Victoria Nuland, but that's not a whole lot better. You have,
Right.
Jade Sullivan and Blinken being like the two people probably closest to Biden, maybe Lloyd Austin. But right now he's confined with COVID. So, I mean, that's at least going to put Kathleen Hitz in a better position for the next couple of weeks, and take Austin, who may be the man who's like most dedicated to Biden's worldview. At least that was some of the reporting from like Mark Perry before he passed away.
Yeah.
Anyways, Scott, anything I guess on that, and just any final thoughts? We could wrap it up here with that, but yeah, just the
Well,
people who are around Biden.
yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. It's a real problem that essentially Sullivan and Blinken and Sherman and all these people are just horrible. Um, and they're so smug. I mean, that back to like the believing your own BS stuff. I think they're all so smug. Um, then again, right, like somebody made the call to have Biden say, we're not going to bring Ukraine into NATO. That was big. Now, he didn't put it in writing and swear forever, but he said, in 10 years, we're not going to invite him in. So, in other words, if he's reelected, he's promising for beyond that, too. That was pretty big. And they had a huddle and they decided that's what we're going to say. To me, that's already signaling that they really don't want to fight here. And I think you're right that Putin has a lot of reasons to not absorb the Donbass, such as he be skewing the balance in Ukraine in favor of the so-called ethnic Ukrainian or the Ukrainian nationalists, and nationalists against the Russian-speaking population, which, he already took Crimea and got rid of a lot of pro-Russian votes right there, right? So why would he want to do that if he wants to keep, at least half the time have his guys win the elections in Ukraine, which has been, the tradition recently anyway. And then also, of course, the aging population, I believe you mentioned, and then they have this decrepit old industry there that, is essentially worthless and can't compete in the world market at all. And so, essentially he would be absorbing a bunch of pensioners that he can't afford and a bunch of industry that doesn't really produce. I mean, they do have some helicopter engines that are made there in the Donbass or in the east of Ukraine anyway, and a couple other things, but not much. And so, but that's the good news, right? So in other words, if the State Department is that paranoid, but their fear ain't coming, then at some point they got to recognize that, right? Like maybe they were lying about the troop buildup here, but a lot of them believed it, right? A lot of them just read it in the paper and said, oh no. But then now look at us. No invasion. It didn't happen. Never happens. They always said that back in 2014 and 15 too. Oh, the Russians are invading. Here it comes. And then they never came. And so, I think if Putin makes and he's got Sergei Lavrov, who is no slouch when it comes to dealing with these kooks either. So, if they make themselves very clear and say, these are our reasonable demands, no NATO, no missile launchers, and I don't know what, call your bomber practice off, whatever their demands are. I didn't read the whole list. I'm behind on this, but then I think the Americans ought to accept that, right? He's not saying you're going to let me occupy the eastern third of Ukraine, sign here, right? We're not talking about unreasonable, crazy stuff here. We're talking about completely reasonable, right? We're not talking about the Anschluss of Austria. We're talking about the Crimean Peninsula that they seized 5-6 years ago that belonged to them all along anyway. So just like with Iran's nuclear program, if the JCPOA falls apart, we still got the NPT. Right. I still don't see, right. So, and if they're not making nukes, then the Americans aren't going to start attacking them. And if the Americans don't start attacking them, they're not going to start making nukes. So we could just leave it at that. And so I think the same kind of thing here. You know what I mean? If the Russians get everything they want, so what? Everything's fine. The Americans don't really have to give up anything other than their position on their high horse, where they like to pretend that they're the good guy and that they did something, whatever. And then if the Russians call them weak, if the Republicans call them weak for backing down, well, then we got to attack the right from the right on that. I saw actually a great clip the other day of this guy, Richard Hanania, who writes for Defense Priorities. Yeah, and he was on Tucker Carlson. And I think this was an old clip from last summer or something. And it was the Republicans ran an attack ad against Biden, calling him weak on Russia and saying that big bad Vladimir Putin is walking all over Biden because of Biden's weakness. And Tucker Carlson essentially played the clip and then essentially was like, what the F is this? And this guy Hanania was like, yeah, exactly. It's terrible. These Republicans are stuck in the Stone Age. That's not what Republicans think anymore. That's not what the America First, movement is about. Russia's no threat. And this should not be their message at all. This is terrible. So, a few more like that, and they're going to start getting it. You know what I mean? I saw, the GOP chairwoman had posted a thing on Twitter saying that too. But all the Republican comments in the responses were like, no, wrong. We don't care about that. Who wants that? Who wants the Republicans to go around echoing Hillary Clinton's Russiagate crap against Joe Biden? You know what I mean? And we had enough of that. And it's the same thing with China, of course. All this stuff about China, backs Joe Biden, and Joe Biden is selling us out to China. What the hell kind of narrative is that, man? Joe Biden's the senator from Delaware, a.k.a. the banks. Always has been. Mm-hmm. To think that he represents foreign interests at the expense of, no.
Right.
American special interests? No way. Does he represent American special interests at the expense of the American people? Sure. But foreign interests at the expense of the American people? Nah, come on.
Right.
Joe Biden's a China hawk, man. He was part of Obama's cabinet when they came up with the Pacific Pivot and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. So people say, yeah, but he and his son had corrupt business deals in China. Yeah, so...
Right.
What does that mean?
Right. Yeah. Hunter's crack and hooker money doesn't drive the American foreign policy, even if, that does get him a few bribes. I guess I'll just say that we have a great article coming out today at antiwar.com by Ted Carpenter that's highlighting that it's just not from the right they'll hear, Scott, that it's the Democrats too. There's tons of them that want Joe Biden to be more aggressive on, various conflicts, like Menendez is crazy on Iran, and Adam Schiff is saying that if we don't sanction Russia, it's very likely that they're going to invade Ukraine. And he's got quotes from like 4 or 5 other Democratic congressmen who are just absolutely rabid on the issue.
Just think about that. If we don't sanction them, they're going to invade. Okay? If you just think about that for a minute. If they were going to invade, then obviously all the sanctions in the world wouldn't stop them from invading. They would have to be determined that, yeah, we're going to go ahead and have a war now. But they're going to be afraid. They're going to back down from Adam Schiff's new sanctions. Come on. The headline itself, the accusation, the whole frame of the reason why is self-refuting.
Yep.
You know, the whole thing is completely stupid.
All right, Scott. Well, thanks so much for coming back on the show. Anything that you want to plug? Anything that you want to talk about? The audiobook for Enough Already is out, right?
Yes, it is.
All right.
And it's 15 hours long, so I don't know if anybody's going to want to listen to it, but maybe you will.
Ain't bad.
Sorry it took so long. 11 months about from the time I put the book out. It took me to finally get the audiobook all the way done for you. Sorry about that. But it's out and sold some already. Hopefully people like it and start getting, responses from it here pretty soon, I guess, or what people think of it. And then, of course, there's Fool's Errand is also a book and an audiobook on Afghanistan. And antiwar.com is where we do our foreign policy stuff. And Libertarian Institute is where we do that and everything else, too. And got a great group of guys there. And the Scott Horton Show is my show. I got 5,650 interviews going back to 2003 there. 19 years of this. All of it for you there at scotthorton.org. And I don't know, man. I think that's it. Oh, I'm on the radio in LA on Sunday mornings on KPFK 90.7 FM.
All right, Scott. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Hell yeah. Thank you, Kyle.